In Tehran, CNN's Anish Raman joins us via broadband. In Phoenix, Arizona, Joseph Cirincione. He's the Senior Vice President for National Security at the Center for American Progress. And with me here in the studio, Ray Takei. He's a Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Anish, on the occasion of that Iranian New Year, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said, quote, "Until today, what we have done has been in accordance with international regulations. But if they take illegal actions, we too can take illegal actions and will do so." What do you interpret that to mean? Might there be some sort of retaliation? Might they seek to expand their nuclear program?
It's a good question. We've seen often statements from Iranian leaders be aggressive but vague, as we saw there. The sense on the ground is that the Supreme Leader is referring to the nuclear program, that if the UN continues to define Iran's pursuit of nuclear energy as illegal, Iran is simply not going to stop, but will pursue that illegal action. We've heard earlier from Iranian officials around UN votes that they could perhaps even kick out the IAEA inspectors that are here and pursue their nuclear program in secret. The resolve does seem at the moment unbreakable within the regime about their nuclear program. We have seen recently some relatively moderate figures within the government telling the people, look, these are serious times, every sort of careful consideration should be taken. But recently we've also seen the hardliners champion two things for their argument about pushing ahead with this program regardless of what might come. First, North Korea. They say, look, the North Koreans tested a nuclear weapon, and after that the U.S. stopped talking at North Korea but talked with them. And they source what you mentioned, that increasing pressure from Russia to get Iran to suspend its nuclear program as further rationale why Iran must be self-sufficient. So we are seeing the hardliners sort of coalesce in their resolve to continue this program. At the same time, among their people, there is a sense that these are very serious times.
Well, Joe Cirincione, the United Nations keeps taking up these resolutions. There was more activity this week. Iran keeps on thumbing at the United Nations. Time for a new approach?
I don't think so. I think this approach is actually showing some results. The key was the December resolution where you had the United Security Council, the PERM 5, U.S., Russia, China, UK, and France all together saying, Iran, you have to stop. This sent shockwaves through the Iranian political establishment. Anish is right, the hardliners haven't budged, but the moderates and the pragmatists have. And you've seen criticism not just from the reformist factions who gained in the December elections against President Ahmadinejad's forces, but also from Ayatollah Khamenei himself. His newspapers, the ones that he controlled, have been criticizing the primitive policies of Ahmadinejad. And these financial sanctions hurt, not the actual technical measures that are in the resolutions, and we're going to see those ratcheted up in the new resolution, but in the impact they have on investor confidence. Investments in Iran are being reduced to a trickle. The stock market has plummeted. There's increased pain being felt in Iran. Now is the time to keep that pressure up, ratchet it up, to cause the kind of reconsideration of the course at the highest levels that you want to see in Iran's political establishment.
But Ray, let's take a look at this from a different angle and pick up on another point that Anish was making. This idea of it was one-on-one talks that broke the North Korean impasse. We saw baby steps toward dialogue between the United States and Iran at that recent meeting in Iraq. Is it time to expand that idea? Sit down in the same room, talk to each other.
Well, I mean, the situation is different. In a sense, Iranians don't really ask for bilateral talks. The modalities of this are not that relevant, whether they're multilateral or bilateral. What the problem with the talks has been the United States' insistence on a precondition that, namely, Iran suspend its uranium enrichment program before talks began on the entire range of issues, and that's where the key obstacle is. Iranians don't seem inclined to desist with their enrichment affairs, and as Anish was saying, they become even more resolved to do so because of the deal. In essence, they're calling for indigenous capability because they can't trust anybody else. So if you're prepared to dispense with a precondition, then I think you can have those talks.
Well, certainly some people are calling for a different approach. Here's what John Bolton, the former ambassador to the United Nations, said on Tuesday, quote, "I believe that ultimately the only real prospect of getting Iran to give up nuclear weapons is to change the regime." Calling for regime change. Anish Raman, that sounds slightly familiar, and to the best of my recollection, it didn't go so well the last time.
Yeah, we've seen offers from Iran right after we saw at the beginning of the Iraq War when the U.S. was really showing its strength. Iran was willing to talk about any number of issues. At that moment, it seemed the U.S. didn't engage in talks because they were in pursuit of a broader strategy, that being regime change. It is the unavoidable backdrop to this nuclear issue. When President Bush labeled Iran as part of the axis of evil alongside Iraq, then subsequently led an invasion into Iraq, Iranian officials felt that they were next, and they continue to feel at the core, especially among the hardliners, that at the core of the nuclear dispute is a desire by the West, and the U.S. specifically, for regime change, and that if they give in at all, as we heard, the call for suspension as a prerequisite for talks, the fear is if they give in to that, other requests will be made, and that it'll all come back to regime change, and that is an important element in terms of what we're seeing from the Iranian defiance.
Joseph Cirincione also reported on earlier this week was this idea that Russia was threatening Iran, saying that if you continue with your nuclear enrichment program, we're not going to give you the nuclear fuel that you need to run the Bushehr nuclear plant. Russia the next day and Iran both denied that. The White House continues to insist it's true. What do you think?
I think Russia's been telling Iran for some time that the continuation of the project, including this delivery of fuel that would actually help start the reactor at its anticipated time of spring 2007, would be conditioned on Iran resolving the issue over its nuclear program with the United Nations. There is also the financial factor involved here. Iran has been behind in payments to Russia, is now telling Russia it wants to pay them in euros. Russia wants dollars. Part of this is all connected with the sanctions that have had this kind of financial impact on Iran. It's causing these financial pressures that are now rippling into the diplomatic pressures. I think Russia's on our side here. It's not pure diplomacy, it's also business, but this pressure is the kind of thing you want to back Iran into the corner. The trick, as Ray was just saying, is to then offer them a way out, open a door for them, have them know that if they begin a process of direct negotiations, it will lead to a normalization of relations, an end to U.S. regime change efforts. It's exactly the opposite of what John Bolton has been preaching incorrectly for the last 5 or 6 years.
And very quickly, if you could, what ultimately will bring about a resolution of this? Action by the United Nations, pressure from big economic partners like Russia, a combination of the two?
Well, there's a sort of emerging consensus, and I think Joe reflected that, and if there was a Bush administration representative, they would say so, that the strategy of pressure is working. The only problem is there's no evidence that it is. On the proliferation front, Iran seems intransigent. On the issues of terrorism, it is still intent on destabilization of Lebanon, and certainly by administration's own acknowledgement, it is becoming mischievous in Iraq. So I'm not quite sure what the successful evidence of this successful policy are, but I guess that remains to be seen.
And another week goes by without resolution. Anish Raman in Tehran, Joe Cirincione in Phoenix, and Ray Taka here in the studio. Thanks very much. Next on This Week at War.